I still remember the chilling headlines: "Men vanished from Milwaukee and nobody knew why." Behind the door of a small apartment, police uncovered something far darker than anyone imagined. Jeffrey Dahmer looked like an ordinary neighbor, but what they found inside revealed a horror beyond belief. I turn the page in my diary and write his name: Jeffrey Dahmer. To the outside world he looked quiet, awkward, and unremarkable. Just another man living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He worked simple jobs, kept to himself, and rarely drew attention. But the life behind his apartment door was anything but ordinary. Dahmer was born in 1960 in West Allis, Wisconsin. As a child, people remembered him as shy and withdrawn. His family life was unsettled. His parents' marriage was filled with tension, and by the time he was a teenager, his world was already unstable. Teachers recalled him as polite but distracted. He seemed lonely, lost in thoughts others couldn't reach. Even in high school, there were strange signs. Dahmer collected dead animals, dissected them, and studied their bones. To some it looked like curiosity. To others, it was a warning. Still, most brushed it aside. He was just a quiet boy with unusual interests. Nobody guessed how far that darkness would one day go. After graduation, Dahmer's life drifted. He tried college, but dropped out. He enlisted in the army, but alcohol and poor discipline led to his discharge. By the late 1970s, he was back in Wisconsin, living a life that seemed ordinary from a distance, but was already hiding disturbing urges. He lived in small apartments, worked at factories and chocolate plants, and spent much of his time drinking alone. Neighbors described him as strange, but not threatening. He was the man you passed in the hallway and forgot moments later. But inside, Dahmer was planning, fantasizing, and slowly turning those thoughts into reality. Milwaukee, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, was an industrial city, with working-class families and diverse communities. People went about their lives, never realizing that one of the most notorious killers in American history lived among them. In an apartment complex on North 25th Street, Dahmer created a private world where his crimes would unfold. I pause as I write, because this is the unsettling truth. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't stand out. He wasn't the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. He blended in, and that disguise made his crimes possible. The background is set: a lonely man in a small apartment, neighbors unaware, the city moving as usual. But something sinister was building inside those walls. And as I close this page of my diary, I feel the next page pulling me forward, to the first disappearances, the timeline that showed how a quiet man became a killer. I turn another page in my diary and write, the year 1978. This was when Jeffrey Dahmer claimed his first victim. He was only 18 at the time. The story begins with a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Dahmer invited him home for drinks, and when Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer panicked. He struck him with a dumbbell and strangled him. Afterward, he dismembered the body. I pause here because this moment was the beginning of everything. Dahmer had crossed the line from fantasy to reality. He buried parts of the body on his family's property and scattered the rest. Later, he admitted he felt both horror and thrill. It was the start of something he couldn't stop. For nearly a decade after that, Dahmer didn't kill again, or at least that's what he claimed. He joined the army, moved around, and tried to live an ordinary life. But his drinking grew worse. He was discharged, arrested for drunken behavior, and drifted through jobs. Still, those urges stayed with him, waiting. By the mid-1980s, he was back in Milwaukee, living with his grandmother. On the surface, it seemed stable, but even there, disturbing signs appeared. Neighbors noticed strange smells. Dahmer was arrested for exposing himself and later for sexual assault of a boy. Yet somehow he slipped through the justice system with light sentences or probation. At first it looked like Dahmer was just troubled and lonely, but then, one detail at a time, the truth of what he was hiding began to surface. In 1987, the killings began again. Stephen Twomey was Dahmer's next victim, lured to a hotel room. Dahmer claimed he didn't remember the murder. He said he woke up to find Twomey dead beside him. But the pattern had restarted, and this time it would not stop. Living with his grandmother, Dahmer began bringing men home. Some disappeared. Neighbors smelled foul odors and complained, but Dahmer explained it away as spoiled meat or plumbing issues. His grandmother eventually asked him to leave, not fully understanding what was happening under her roof. By 1988, Dahmer moved into an apartment of his own. It was there that his methods grew darker. He began experimenting with drugs to sedate his victims. He kept body parts, photos, and eventually skulls as trophies. At first, police who encountered him thought the complaints were minor. But then came one encounter that should have stopped him, yet didn't. In 1991, a 14-year-old boy named Konarak Sinthasamphone escaped from Dahmer's apartment, drugged and disoriented. Neighbors called police, but when Dahmer convinced officers that the boy was his adult lover, who had simply had too much to drink, they left him in Dahmer's custody. Hours later, the boy was dead. I stop my writing here for a moment, because this was the critical buildup. Complaints ignored, warnings dismissed, and victims overlooked. It was the silence around Dahmer that allowed his crimes to continue. And now, as I close this section, I know the next page of my diary will no longer be about hints or warnings. It will be about the full horror, when Dahmer's crimes finally came to light, and the world saw what had been happening in that small Milwaukee apartment. I turn the page in my diary, and now the curtain pulls back on Dahmer's apartment, apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee. What looked like a simple, run-down one-bedroom was actually a place of horror. Inside, Dahmer lured men with promises of money, drinks, or companionship. Once inside, he offered them alcohol laced with sleeping pills. When they passed out, he strangled them. He took photographs, posed bodies, and kept trophies: skulls, bones, even entire skeletons. I pause my writing here because this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Neighbors smelled foul odors, heard the sound of a saw, and even complained about strange noises. Dahmer explained it away. He said it was spoiled meat, dead fish, or his tropical pet snakes. And somehow, those excuses worked. At first, police thought these were just neighbor complaints, but later, those details became chilling clues that had been missed again and again. In total, Dahmer killed 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Most were young, many were from marginalized communities, and some were teenagers. His methods were as disturbing as the crimes themselves. He experimented with preservation, attempting to create what he called zombies by drilling holes in skulls and pouring acid, hoping to keep victims alive but under control. He stored body parts in his refrigerator and freezer. He kept skulls as trophies, painted or bleached them, and arranged them in a shrine-like manner. I shudder as I write these words, because in his own confessions, Dahmer admitted he wanted complete control. Companionship without rejection. His crimes weren't just murder. They were rituals born from obsession, loneliness, and sadistic fantasy. At first, everything looked like isolated disappearances. But when investigators finally entered his apartment, what they found changed the case forever. On July 22, 1991, one of Dahmer's would-be victims, Tracy Edwards, escaped. Handcuffed and terrified, he flagged down police. He led officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they expected a minor domestic issue. Instead, they found the truth. I underline this date in my diary, July 22, 1991. Inside Dahmer's apartment, police discovered photographs of dismembered bodies, a freezer with human remains, and barrels filled with acid and body parts. They found skulls stacked in the closet, bones preserved, and even hearts and organs kept for consumption. It was not just murder, it was cannibalism. This is why the world later called him the Milwaukee Cannibal. The sheer scale and brutality of what police uncovered shocked the entire world. Even seasoned officers broke down at the sight. Neighbors who had complained for years now realized what had been happening just feet away. The smells, the noises, the strange excuses. It all made sense in the worst possible way. The unimaginable had been uncovered. But investigators soon realized something that didn't make sense. How had he managed to keep killing for so long, right under everyone's noses? And with that question, I close this section of my diary. Because the next page isn't about the murders anymore. It's about the investigation, the mistakes, the missed opportunities, and how Dahmer stayed hidden until it was far too late. I turn the page in my diary and write what the police saw. That July night in 1991, the apartment was sealed off, and investigators moved carefully, documenting everything. Each room revealed another layer of horror. Photographs of victims, bones, preserved heads, and cooking utensils meant for cannibalism. Even seasoned detectives admitted they had never seen anything like it. The crime scene photos were so disturbing that some officers needed counseling afterward. One officer described it as walking into hell. At first, police thought they had uncovered a string of murders. But then the evidence revealed something even darker. Dahmer had been killing, in ways the world had rarely seen. Investigators worked quickly. They identified victims through dental records, fingerprints, and DNA, but some could never be fully named because of the condition of the remains. Families who had wondered about missing sons finally had devastating answers. Dahmer was questioned for hours. Unlike many killers who deny or resist, he spoke openly. He confessed to 17 murders, describing in detail how he lured, killed, dismembered, and even ate parts of his victims. His calmness shocked detectives. One officer later said, "He told us things like he was describing a recipe." The police thought the confessions might be exaggerated, but each search confirmed that Dahmer was telling the truth. The public was horrified. Newspapers printed headlines about the Milwaukee Cannibal. Families in the city struggled to accept that this quiet man in glasses had been living among them, shopping in the same stores, riding the same buses. But the investigation also exposed failures. Neighbors had complained for years about smells and noises. Police had once returned Conorak Synthosom phone to Dahmer after believing his lies. That mistake alone cost a young boy his life. Community. Anger grew. Many accused the police of ignoring complaints because many victims were gay men of color, living in poorer neighborhoods. The case forced a painful conversation about negligence, discrimination, and how law enforcement missed clear warning signs. The police thought their mistakes would fade with Dahmer's arrest, but the controversy over what was missed would follow the case forever. By early 1992, the evidence was overwhelming. Dahmer was charged with 15 murders in Wisconsin, with 2 more later confirmed. His trial would not be about whether he was guilty. It would be about how to punish a man who admitted to such horrors. And so, as I close this section of my diary, I turn to the next page, to the trial itself, the shocking twists, and the climax of Jeffrey Dahmer's story. I turn the next page of my diary, and now the story enters the courtroom. In January 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer went on trial in Milwaukee. The evidence was overwhelming: photographs, body parts, confessions. There was no question of guilt. The real question was about his mind. Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 murders. His defense argued that his cannibalism and bizarre experiments showed severe mental illness. His attorneys said no sane person could do what Dahmer did. But the prosecution countered with a chilling point. Dahmer planned his crimes carefully, bought tools, lured victims, and covered his tracks. That level of control, they argued, proved he knew exactly what he was doing. At first, some thought the insanity defense might succeed, but then one piece of testimony changed everything. Experts testified that Dahmer was not legally insane. He simply lacked empathy. Jurors were shown the evidence in detail, from the preserved skulls to the barrels of acid. They listened to Dahmer's own words, calm and matter-of-fact, as he described his methods. For many, that calmness was more disturbing than rage. After less than a week of deliberation, the jury rejected insanity. Jeffrey Dahmer was found legally sane and guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, nearly 1,000 years behind bars. I underline the next date in my diary, November 28, 1994. By then, Dahmer was serving his sentence at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. He kept mostly to himself, though he reportedly found religion in prison, reading the Bible and receiving baptism. But his notoriety made him a target. That morning, Dahmer was assigned to work detail with 2 other inmates. Guards left them unsupervised to clean a bathroom. Within minutes, another inmate, Christopher Scarver, attacked Dahmer with a metal bar taken from the gym. When guards returned, Dahmer lay mortally wounded. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The police thought Dahmer's story had ended with his arrest. But the shocking twist was that justice came not from the courts, but inside prison walls. Reactions were mixed. Some families of victims felt relief that he was gone. Others said his death denied them the chance to hear more answers. To the public, Dahmer's death seemed almost symbolic, killed violently after living violently. And as I close this section of my diary, I can feel the weight of the entire story. Dahmer's crimes were solved, his punishment delivered, yet his name lingers like a shadow. The next page will be my final words about what remains today and the haunting questions left behind. I close the diary with the final truth. Jeffrey Dahmer's case is solved. Arrested in 1991, he confessed to 17 murders, and the horrifying evidence in his apartment confirmed every detail. In 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison. His death in 1994, killed by another inmate, brought an end to his life, but not to his story. Today, Dahmer's name remains one of the darkest in American history. His crimes forced police, courts, and communities to face hard questions about justice, missed warnings, and how evil can hide in plain sight. And so, my diary ends with this thought: Jeffrey Dahmer's story may be finished, but the questions linger. Why did he do it? How many more victims might there have been? And could he have been stopped sooner if warnings were taken seriously? What do you think? Was Dahmer simply a product of deep psychological illness, or was he fully aware and evil in every choice he made? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more haunting true crime stories that the world will never forget.